A very good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the 16th Marketing Conclave. Thank you so much for joining in back. I am here presenting you an interesting after-hour session hosted by the Indian Express on the evolution of storytelling in India. For this, we have Mr. Anand Tiwari, a filmmaker, in conversation with Mr. Amish Tripathi, an author. Welcome, Mr. Tiwari and Mr. Tripathi. Over to you, Mr. Tiwari.
Hi, Ami sir. Hi, everyone who's been listening to us, live or otherwise. And thank you so much for the opportunity, IANAI and the Indian Express, that I get to have this conversation virtually with one of my favorite authors.
Oh, thank
I
you.
also have this great fortune of sharing the same initials as you, Ami sir. So I will count my blessings. Ami sir,
And and
because
and
say,
Tiwari and Tripathi have the same root as well.
apparently I've been told.
Are you a UP wala Tiwari or a Gujarat wala Tiwari?
यूपी वाला सर वेरी
यूपी
मच
अरे हमारे गंगा किनारे के हैं।
एकदम राय बरेली
अरे वाह वाह वाह।
fourth generation Mumbai absolutely confused with my Maharashtrian and UP moorings, but I use whichever suits me at whatever point.
Correct. I was born in Mumbai,
Same here.
and I spent my early years in Odisha and Tamil Nadu. And my father's family is from Banaras, from Kashi.
Oh
My
wow,
mother's family is from MP. I'm like from all over. Did my MBA in IIM Calcutta, much of my working life in Mumbai, and now in London, all over.
that's so amazing. I'm it's such a broad topic that we are supposed to discuss the evolution of storytelling in even if we limit it to India, it is still too broad to talk for half an hour. So, Amisha, I guess because you've seen India with so many cities, I'm sure that kind of has an effect on the understanding that you have for India. But I'm going to try and keep my questions because I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you many questions, as many as I can fit in. Uh, I'm going to be a little greedy and start asking them right away.
Sure, please. Yes, sir.
So, one of my most key questions that I always wanted to understand from you, because I feel you're one of the pivots for storytelling in the mythology of India. Earlier, right from the Ram Leela days to the early 50s, 60s, when we made mythological films, to even Jai Santoshima, which
Yes.
happened in the 70s, to, of course, the Ramayans and the Mahabharats in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a certain kind of a way of telling stories which were mythological. There was a certain amount of, you know, divinity towards them. There was a certain amount of impersonification, if I may say so, towards these heroes or characters. With your writing, that completely changed. There came a personification of these characters. Um, where I feel the discussion on whether these characters were myths or whether they were real, and some of it I find quite funny, because this whole conversation about mythology and reality is such a stupid fight to get
It's a
into. But
childish conversation.
I'd like to understand from you what made you decide that I'm going to talk about these heroes in a way which is very personified, and suddenly you saw the entire country connected with these characters. What was your journey when you thought of it?
Lovely question, Anand. Thank you so much. And you're someone who understands stories well and our culture well, so you'll get where I'm coming from. Um, First things first. I mean, I don't think I have. It'll be arrogant of me to think I have connected anyone. It's not true. Our culture is so ancient. We are the only pre-Bronze Age pagan culture that is still alive. Every other pre-Bronze Age culture, Pharaonic Egypt, Mesopotamia, they've all been
Mm,
wiped out. Most
right.
of them violently. We're the only ones who are still alive. And a part of our culture being alive is our connection to our stories, right? What is culture? It's food, it's the stories that you believe in, it's the way we behave, it's our attachment to our land. So
Right.
uh, this has been so much a part of our land for so long, you know. And like I said, the oldest surviving civilization in the world is us. Uh, so for me to say that I have reconnected would be hugely arrogant. I have just added in my very small bit to a very, very rich tradition. And a tradition which is, in Nassim Nicholas Taleb's term, anti-fragile. Why are we the only ones who are still alive? Like the only ones from pre-Bronze Age time. China is not as old as us. China is just 2,500 to 3,000 years old. Pre-Bronze Age means at least 5,000 years old, which is only us. Everyone else has died out. And I think part of why we are alive, it's a theory I have, and I write non-fiction as well. Okay, so one of my non-fiction books is called Immortal India, and I'd spoken of this theory out there. I think one of the reasons why our culture has remained alive is we have this unique gift, of keeping the best of the old, but adding in something of the new, and we do it repeatedly. What does this allow us to do? If you think about it, if a culture is so attached and so rigid that it can't swing with the times, that if it's like if you have a massive tree, right? And a huge cyclone comes, if the tree is too rigid, it'll fall, right? And that happened to some cultures, it happened to Mesopotamia, right? But if some cultures have no strength, they are so flexible that they're like kusha grass, anyone can walk all over them. A bit like, sadly, what ended up happening to some of the American cultures, the Native American earlier cultures. They were too flexible, right? So they couldn't fight back when the Europeans attacked, right? So you need an ideal mix of both, not so rigid that you can't adapt to changing times, not so flexible that you have no astitva of your own, no character of your own. India is that ideal mix. We are rigid enough that we can survive 1,000 years of invasions, but we are flexible enough that we can change with the times, right? And you see this in our stories again and again. So the divinification of our gods and goddesses, where we started seeing them as external beings, cannot be questioned, happened only in the last 1,000 years actually. Prior to that, or you see all our ancient versions, we had a very different relationship with our gods as compared to many of the Middle Eastern and Western faiths, where our approach was we almost treat them like we have a relationship with them. Like we can have a fight with them. They are like our elder brother. They can be our father. You know what it is? So it's not external. It is like us. So there's no concept of blasphemy in Vedic Sanskrit, for example. So therefore, we almost had a relationship with our gods. So like the way term namaste, and you see this attitude of divinification being everywhere in all our words. Namaste means I bow to the divine within you. That's what it means. Okay. So it's not just we don't just see the gods as gods. We see each other as gods as well. So therefore, the gods are kind of like our archetypes rather than an external being who sits on a sad height and judges us. We don't see it that way. That was our traditional way. We lost that a bit in the last 1,000 years, understandable perhaps because of the invasions. But now we are rediscovering that ancient way, I think. So I think my books aren't anything new. It's actually closer to the ancient way as it was. So the stories are in some ways a reconnection with the past. That's the way I see it, with our ancient past.
Right. But, and it's so interesting that you're saying this. I come from theatre, Amisa. In the folk forms, and I of course know a little more about the Marathi folk forms than any other part of India, there is always this character of Ganu or the Vasu, which are so personified, and they are so contemporary. They even talk about local politics, and characters on stage are having conversations with them, while the Krishna's character is kind of a sutradhar who's from the outside, talking about what the story is. But it's a very personified form of Krishna. And I'm guessing hence folk is a great way to look at a culture in terms of how it has survived over a period of time, and
it's what remains in the heart, right?
True.
we had a rich writing tradition. There's one of the, the nonsense things that were told to us in the British Raj is that apparently ancient Indians didn't write. So load of bullshit. Ancient Indians wrote a hell of a lot. Okay. According to the National Mission of Manuscripts, there are 3 million handwritten manuscripts that survive till today. Sanskrit manuscripts. Okay. That's more than the rest of the ancient world combined.
Right.
So our ancient Indians didn't just write, they wrote more than the rest of the ancient world combined. Right. They used to write that much.
True.
And so many of our manuscripts would have got destroyed when Nalanda University was, burnt by, by Bakhtiyar Khilji, or Takshashila University was destroyed. Despite that, 3 million manuscripts survive. Despite that, you see the other side as well. Our traditions never didn't privilege texts over the Shruti, over what is heard or what could be in the folk traditions as well. There's a lovely Sanskrit line. It's popular in Maharashtra as well. Shastra Rudhir Balyasi. That folk traditions are more important than the Shastras. Okay, than the text. So it's not that our ancestors didn't write, they wrote a hell of a lot. But they respected the folk traditions. And that's where, folk traditions where the rasas come out, with gay abandon, right? Like you see Gond Ramayani, for example. I don't know if you've seen that. Such a different take on the Ramayana. Right? Sita Ma is a warrior, okay, there, and completely different. And look, I mean, it's a tribal version of the Ramayana, and it's the version of the Gond tribals, and they love Lord Ram and Sita Ma in that. So what's wrong with it? Right? It's a very different version from the Ramcharitmanas, for example.
But Ami sir, coming back to what your way of storytelling, I'm sure at the time when you wrote Melua, being the first outing as a fiction writer, which was taking so much from the history, I'm sure the rigidity that you talk about, would have hit you. I'm sure Melua wasn't an easy in for you. And because we are talking to a lot of the audience which deals with marketing and storytelling, I want to understand from you why the choices that you made at that time to market that book were just amazing. I remember there was if I'm not mistaken, a trailer that you had for it. For Vayu Putra, if I'm not mistaken, you guys also had with Tawfiq Saf, if I'm not mistaken, a music thing that came. So you always were breaking the norms in terms of how you were talking about your content. Was that from necessity? Was that coming from something that you already had in mind? How did that evolution happen? You were taking old stories and saying them in your way. Maybe they were connected to the old, but your marketing style was absolutely new. And where did that come?
It's like a mix of both, right? Because when I wrote the book, I mean, you know how it is. You're a storyteller as well. You have to write with the purity of your heart, right? Care a damn about critics, about readers, everyone. When you're writing, right? When you're creating or when you're making a movie, be completely pure to the art. But once you start marketing, then you have to be a practical, pragmatic guy. Your producer should not lose money. My publisher should not lose money, right? So the product is pure. Product cannot be touched. The book has to be the way it is. So what we were thinking was that, look, there was a sense that the way it is written, it will appeal to the youth a lot more, right? Which was completely counterintuitive, because my first book, Immortals of Melua, had been rejected by every publisher it had been sent to. I self-published, okay? And they said it's a guaranteed flop because the main market for books are the youth, and they're reading campus romances rather than religious books. And they said, you've broken every rule because it's a very long book. They said, look, the youth have no attention. Any book longer than 100 pages will not work. And my books are 400, 500 pages long. They're on a religious tradition in a respectful way. Okay. And thirdly, they said, you have these Gyan sessions every second, third chapter. Because for me, the story is a vehicle to convey philosophy, which is the traditional Indian style.
Yeah.
We Indians have never believed, our ancient Indians, that you have to dumb things down to make it mass. We've never believed that. That's more it's a relatively recent import we have had more from Western tradition. You don't have to dumb things down, right? Make the language casual, yes, but you don't have to dumb things down a book or a movie must have some philosophies, otherwise it serves no purpose. It's as
Right.
pointless as a body without a soul.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
if this is the way the book was and we wanted to appeal to the youth, one way is kind of just dip your toes in it, and try, or actually just jump in, right? And do something so radically different that you just that that a youthful reader seeing it will, okay, ye kya hai? Let me just check it out, right?
Mm, mm,
So we thought we'll have all the symbology of Lord Shiva that's there,
right.
and Tawfiq Qureshi ji actually made the music for the Melua trailer as well, you know,
Oh, yes.
like, and
I
it was
still remember it was this chant that was going on.
It
I
was
remember it.
so
Yeah.
kick-ass, and I was sitting in the room when Tawfiq Qureshi ji was making it.
Kya baat.
Yes, genius. He's just pure genius, right? And the chants, okay, that was actually sung by Tawfiq Qureshi ji himself.
Wow.
The chants are actually the Tanda Stotra. It's a prayer to Lord
Ah,
Ram. Sorry, to Lord Shiva. It's a
Lord Shiva,
prayer to
correct.
Lord Shiva. And most of us Shaivites, we hear it now. It's like अपने रोंगटे खड़े हो जाते हैं. It's a very, very powerful prayer. It's written by Ravan. Okay. The
Yes,
prayer
of
has been
course.
written by Ravan.
Who's
Okay.
one of the biggest
He was
devotees
one of the
of
biggest
Shiva.
Shimbaks.
Yeah.
And that, listen, I was self-publishing. I didn't have too much money, man. I just
Uh,
paid from my salary, a banker's salary.
right.
So we actually just shot a model against a green chroma screen, and
Hmm.
we added the backdrop. And it was the
Hmm.
music which actually carried it through. And it was just so different that
Yeah.
we posted it on YouTube, and it got a lot of views, and mainly the youth, right? And who got
Correct.
interested. What is this? And we didn't even make it clear कि ये क्या है, movie है, book है.
To be honest,
Just
हम बहुत
discovered
लोगों
it.
को लगा, including me. I thought it was a movie that is coming out, and I
हाँ.
thought कि
Because book के
mind
ऊपर
blowing.
trailer बनता ही नहीं था. That was the first. From what I've been told,
Exactly.
is the first time a trailer was made for a book, at least in
Yeah,
India.
yeah. Even I saw it for the first time, and it was so amazing that it spoke so something that I'm gathering from you, and these are two creatives talking to a lot of marketers.
हाँ.
What you said, I hope everybody follows, is if you keep the purity of the content right there, there are
Correct.
hundreds of ways to still market it, and creatives will only help you find ways.
Exactly. You know this. I know. I've been. One of the departments I ran. I was a banker for 14 years, right? So
I've,
I
I've
worked
read.
in services for 14 years. One of the
Right.
departments I ran was marketing, right?
Hmm.
And in marketing, there's always been this debate. People who want to research the thing to death, or people who want to take, a gut call. But that gut call
Right.
cannot be hawa mein, you're sitting in an ivory tower.
Hmm.
If you're just sitting in an AC office and you think you understand the market, you understand Zone. You
Right.
actually have to be out in you have to be traveling 25 days a month. You have to be out in the market. You have to engage with people who are completely out of your social circles. Okay.
Right.
If one of my rules is every day I must engage with at least two people who make me deeply uncomfortable. Okay. If they are saying things, I'm like, abhi ye kya bol raha hai? Okay. And either on social media and think, see what that does, because all of us have our bubble, right?
Right.
Marketers, they also have their bubble, and they
Right.
think bubble is the world, right? Which is why they get shocked when reality enters their bubble, right?
Hmm.
You have to attempt to break that bubble yourself and engage with people who make you deeply uncomfortable. You should, in your mind, actually be thinking, "Yaar, ye kya bol raha hai?" Okay, that's when you discover, and don't judge, just learn, right? That's when you get a deeper understanding. Then your instincts become better. I'd much rather, on judging a creative,
Hmm.
instinct works much better than research. Your best creatives never come out of researching a damn thing to death and sitting by committee. वैसे नहीं हो, right? Uh, it's
But
about
sir, एक content creator का सवाल, which I find, your latest book, Suhail Dev, I find that very fascinating. I want to understand how difficult or different is it when when you're writing the Shiva trilogy, or when you're capturing the Ramayana, uh, you're basing something which has a collective consciousness, especially for most Indians. They have their own presumptions about what Lord Shiva was, what Lord
yeah,
Ram is, what their worlds were, even the A, B, C, D characters, everybody knows what they were. Some of the memories got refurbished or realigned with the TV series that came. Uh, But when you're taking a character like Suhail Dev, that not many of us knew, I didn't know much about him at all. Uh, and now you're writing with a completely uncharted territory. Is that writing process any different from the writing process of, say, your Shiva trilogy, or when you're writing your Ramayana trilogy? Is that process different for you?
Damn good question. Yeah. I think it will depend on, how you write. Like, I am an instinctive writer. Right?
Hmm.
So, like the Shiva trilogy is spread over 3 books. The Ramchandra series is spread over 5 books.
Right.
The first 3 books are in a multi-linear narrative, which is, I'm never doing it again. It is too complex. Okay. There are three narratives run in parallel. All 3 end from Lord Ram's birth, Sita Ma's birth, Ravan's birth. All 3 end with Sita Apharan, the kidnapping
Right.
of Goddess Sita. 4th book onwards is a common narrative. So this, at least I'm not aware of a multi-linear narrative being tried in books in India. I know it's been, Rashomon, for example, the Japanese book.
Right.
It was hugely complex. Okay. And like I said, I'm never doing it again. But like शिवाजी बन के मैंने बोल दिया था मैं करूंगा. When I started writing, I realized, boss, ये तो बहुत complicated है. But you won't believe it. It may be such complex narrative structures. I make no notes. I make no flowcharts. I make no character. Seriously, I do nothing of that. It just comes.
Right.
It truly is like, for me, like there's a parallel universe. The characters are living out their lives out there, and I get the privilege of entering that universe and recording what I see. And genuinely, for me, I actually see it and I describe what I see. And in many ways, that parallel universe is more real than the world we are living in right now. Like
I
right now,
understand.
I can't hear your thoughts. Okay, I
Right.
can see your face and guess what you're thinking, but I can't hear your thoughts. In that universe, I can hear people's thoughts. I can feel their emotions. I cry with them. I laugh with them. So in some ways, it's more real. And if I write this way, and it's completely instinctive, then whether I'm writing something on which most people know, like the Shiva, or the story of King Suheldev, which many people don't know, for me, the process is the same. I'm just instinctively just writing. I'm just seeing it and describing
But
it.
just the pressure of being
But
now a celebrated writer, a multi book selling writer, bestsellers all. Does that pressure come in when you're trying something like a Suhail Dev? Or because you're going away from what people have
what you,
moved. Like, I'm waiting for the
the comfort
Mahabharat
zone.
series. I'm
Ah,
right. So when you do that, is there a voice inside saying, "Ki, why am I going away from the track that I'm already on? What people expect me to do?"
it's natural for that voice to come
Right.
in for any creative guy, right? Because like you get into a comfort zone. But I think the best stuff comes when you actually get out of your comfort zone, right? If you get into one comfortable place all the time, you will just get into a rigmarole and you won't, your best will not come out. You
Right.
have to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. And I think this is one of the things, at least I suggest to creatives in ad agencies as well, not just guys who are just writing for ourselves as we are. Even if you're writing for your client, do different stuff. Don't be in the same industry all the time, right?
Right.
Because your ideas start getting, if you're servicing only, say, FMCG, you're never servicing financial services, or you're servicing only India, never Europe, for example. Get out
Right.
of your comfort zone where the first 6 months will feel कि boss मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ? Okay.
Right.
And for me, sometimes I jump in, I might look back and think कि यार मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ? It's not just about creativity. Right now I'm a bureaucrat. Okay. And I
Right. Of course.
just for 3 years, just for 3 years. Okay. But I've been a private sector guy all my life. Okay. This is the first time I'm with the government. Okay. Now there are strengths and areas of improvement in whichever field you're in. Right? But boss, for the first 6 months, I was trying to figure out, अबे यहाँ पे काम कैसे करते? But
Right.
because so radically different from all that my life has been till now, right? But I can tell you, I have grown so much in the last 6 months. I've got so many experiences. I've got book ideas, based on my bureaucratic experiences, which I'm sure
Wow. I can't wait for this.
would put yourself in uncomfortable situations. That's how you grow, right? That's how you
So,
grow.
so,
What is a
sir,
workout? What is a workout essentially?
correct.
You know, when you work out or when you're jogging, running, or whatever, you're putting your muscles in an uncomfortable
True.
situation. At times, you will get injured. When do your muscles build? Your muscles don't build when you're doing that exercise. At that time, actually, you're straining, perhaps injuring your muscles. Your muscles build when you relax because your muscles got used to a different movement, and then you take protein at that time, and your muscles are adapting. That's how you
Correct.
grow. So that's what it is. Put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. That's how you grow. I mean, find a balance. Don't
True.
be discomfort all the
Don't
time. Just try
okay. सिर्फ
something,
shoulder मत
but
मारो.
don't comfort all the time.
Correct. कभी
Shoulder
कभी
और leg
बैक
दोनों
बाइसेप
एक
भी
साथ
कर
मत
ले.
करो.
Correct. Sir, talking about discomfort as creators, I don't know how much time we have, but I'll try and slip in one or two more questions. So one question I feel as a creator that kind of hounds from an advertising agency copywriter to a marketer to a storyteller like me who's a filmmaker, and I want to hear the author's point of view, is the fact that today the Gen Z is a storyteller generation. This is probably the first generation that is competing with all of us to tell
Yeah,
stories. Every day they get up in the morning and they are figuring what is the story they are saying visually with photographs, the tags they put in, the Twitter handles that they have, and so on and so forth. And they're judging everybody else to the stories they see. So it's so everybody keeps talking about millennials and confusing the millennials with Gen Z. I
Gen
feel
Z.
they're two very different
Exactly. Exactly.
sections.
Right.
And I find Gen Z the most interesting generation, also the biggest population of this country and beyond. Um, and very misunderstood too. A lot of people think that they are just looking into their phone and they are the most creative generation. They are the most aspirational generation. When we are making content for them, we are always being quite humble about the fact that we need to understand from them. When you are taking stories that belong to their own culture, I'm talking about Indian Gen Zs, and you are now making them connect to something that is 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old. Is that something that you keep in mind at all, or do you only trust your inner voice and let that kind of determine everything else?
I think damn good question. Yeah. Um, it's connecting a bit back to what I spoke earlier,
Hmm.
that when I'm writing, I genuinely just listen to my inner voice. I don't care at all. I
Right.
start thinking of others only during my marketing phase,
Mhm.
which is why actually I don't really engage too much. You'll notice outside of my book launch times, I do very few media interviews. You don't see me on TV panel discussions. You don't see my pictures on pastry because I never attend pastry parties. I'm normally by myself. It's only around my book launch time, those 5-6 months where I do it. It's my job at that time to promote. And it's the way I instinctively am. But one of the things I've learned about the Gen Z, because most of my readers are also millennials or Gen Z, right?
Right.
Most of my interactions on LitFest everywhere is normally with these two groups.
Right.
A few things that strike me instinctively about Gen Z and to a certain extent the millennials as well, the younger millennials. A, uh, they like you to be authentic,
Hmm.
right? Uh, and they are very okay with I am who I am. Some will like me, some will not. That's okay.
Hmm.
But I will be who I am, right? So for example, I mean, I'm not going to do or no, what is that? That heart sign. No, I'm it's not me and I'm not going to do it. Right. Okay. But like when we were young, we
Right.
would do this. That's cool. Right. And I'm not going to do this. No, for example.
Yeah.
And it's not that they mind it. They, and in today's social media world, if you're trying to
Hmm.
be a fake, boss, you'll get caught up. It's a
Hmm.
matter of time. You'll get caught up. Be who you are. Right. And some will like you, some will not like you. That's completely fine. You have to be okay with that. That's one. And often people try to pretend, either to be, woke or unwoke. Whereas on some issues you may agree with the woke, and on some issues you disagree with the woke. You're with the other side. Be who you are. Don't try to. That's one thing
Right.
that I've learned. be authentic. Second,
Hmm.
one of the other things that strikes me the most about Gen Z, and because you're so right that they are storytellers themselves. Okay.
Hmm.
And obviously everyone loves their own stories the most. Okay. So you're competing for the most critical resource in today's day, which is their time.
Right.
Uh, Everything else is secondary because so many things are just free right now. You're competing for their time. That's what they paid for. Right. That's what you'll get money for. Now, one thing that one is seeing with them, unlike us, unlike my generation, I'm 45. I think you're a little younger.
Yes.
Mistaken. Yeah. So, but at least my generation, we've got average attention spans, right? Uh, with Gen Z and with millennials, I've seen either they give you nothing. There's that famous, 8-second attention span
Yeah.
based on American research, but probably applies
Right.
everywhere. So either they give you nothing or they give you everything. They'll give you a full weekend. There's no
Exactly.
middle ground, right? Like me, for example, I've quoted this example many times. I worship the ground Amitabh Bachchan walks on. Okay, I'm
Same.
like his biggest fan. Okay, but I can't watch 8 movies of his one after the other. I can't do that. Right? I can watch one movie and then that's it. Now I have to do something else.
Right.
But this generation, they can, like, there are guys who will watch 3 entire seasons of something,
Yeah.
or read 3 of my books one after the other over a weekend,
Right.
or they'll give you nothing, right? So the rewards of getting it right is you win everything.
Yes.
It's like for us creatives, it's become far more difficult. There's no average it
I,
anymore.
I
Either
I'll
you
tell
get
you our
everything, or you get
right.
nothing.
I'll give you our little learning, sir. We did a show called Bandish Bandits, which is on Amazon Prime right now, and it's based on classical music. And we were so worried, like the youth generally doesn't consume classical music. Would they really get into it? Not. There is a love story that's there to keep the plot running, which is a Gen Z love story. But we were so amazed and surprised by the way the youth binge watched our series. In 3 days, there were people who had binge watched it twice. And you're
Because it was
so right,
authentic. It was
because it is
authentic.
authentic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And something that I'll follow up, and I think they're asking us to wrap up with my final question on this one, and which is kind of related to what we are talking about. There is everybody knows this story that there is a famous brand that has seen a lot of success in India that had to rebrand itself very recently. Uh, do you feel, and without taking any names, do you feel the young Indian is more comfortable in their own skin now than ever before? Do you think there is a kind of a confidence in this youth that we haven't seen, say, since ever? I mean, till in the
For a
last
few
37
centuries.
years, at least I haven't seen that kind of, there's always a certain sense of others are slightly better than us, but that is not how this generation probably feels anymore. Is that the right presumption? What's your take on that?
Completely agree. You know, uh, I think we as a nation haven't had this confidence in generations, in centuries
Mm,
actually. Because,
mm,
see, there was a time when we were the cultural superpowers of the world. There was a time in the first millennium, for example,
mm.
when more than half the world had adopted our ways of life. We never conquered Southeast Asia, but 2,000 years ago, they all Hinduized themselves. They built Hindu-style temples. They changed their names, right? China, Japan, Central Asia all became Buddhist. Mithraism, which was the most popular religion among Roman soldiers 2000 years
Right.
ago, came from India. Mithra was a Vedic god, right? Mitanni, who were Middle Eastern in what is today's Turkey, who weren't of Indian origin. They used to begin there, and they are like what, 2,500 years ago, probably more. They used to begin their treaties with a prayer to Lord Indra and Lord Varun. There
Right.
was a time when we were like people would Indianize themselves because it raised their status. Like today, people Americanize themselves.
We were the it
Don't call,
culture.
yeah, like don't call me Mukesh, call me Mike. Those types, right? Yeah. And so we were the cool culture in those days. People
Right.
used to Indianize themselves to raise their status. And I think we lost that historical self-confidence for various reasons: invasions, economic decline. various things, right? That's what makes me so excited about being an Indian today. One is seeing a return of that confidence, not just like it's not just a generation or two. It's like a revival after centuries, right?
Mm.
Large part of it, I think, is what has started happening after 1991, right? The economic reforms, because
Right.
after centuries we started rediscovering our mojo, started becoming successful again. Now,
Yes.
this return of this confidence will have some positives and negatives as well. Okay. Positives, of course, will become a much more successful country. There are negatives too. People will, I think, at times get unnecessarily over aggressive. Those things also happen, right? So it's a time of intense change, but it's a very exciting time. It's a great time for creatives because one of the best times to write stories is in a time of massive historical change like this. The only time in history where a country of this scale has risen at so fast a pace has been China, you know, over the last 20,
Right.
30 years. And China has lost a lot of its core culture because
Mm.
with Marx, they've risen economically, but a lot of the traditional Chinese culture has sadly been lost, right?
Mm.
Because I mean, the communists aren't necessarily open to indigenous cultures. India, this is probably the last time you'll see a country of this scale rising and rediscovering its past. It is such an exciting time.
It
And
is.
these creative guys, storytellers, including ad filmmakers, are a part of this conversation, right? It is such an exciting time.
That's so fantastic, sir. I'll take one of the audience questions I think they've sent us. Uh, I mean, I personally have my point of view on this one, but I'll ask you this. Do you feel making a movie or a TV series on a book is the only way to reach a larger audience? Has reading book become history in this fast-moving world? Your take on it, sir?
Yeah, it's certainly, it's a different media.
Mhm.
You lose a lot in it because you have to lose a bit of the depth when you make a movie. It's just a function of time, right? A book is, as my friend Karan had said, a book is like a marriage, a movie is like a one-night stand. So, so you don't have the gift of time, right? So
Right,
you can't build a story as deeply in a movie, but it's a
right.
different, yeah, there's no doubt about it. But I don't think books are going out of style. Yeah, in fact,
Absolutely not.
sales have shot up over the last 10, 15 years. 15 years ago, a bestseller meant 5,000 copies, right?
Right.
Today, a bestseller means at least 40, 50,000 copies. There are a few selling in the lakhs. There are two of us who are selling in the millions. This would have been impossible 15, 20 years ago. So I don't think books are going out of style. Having said that, there's no doubt movies, series, it adds a new dimension. And I'm certainly working on that. I'm working on, I've started my own production house in Mumbai.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
so I'm planning to convert Suhail Dev into a movie by myself. We're developing it ourselves. Actually.
That's fantastic, sir. I also act. I'll come for auditions.
Done.
I'll take one more question and then I think we can call our session eight. So there is a question which says, with the world getting closer and closer, are traditional cultures being impacted and how is storytelling turning because of it? Your take
Oh
on
yeah.
that?
Okay. Good question. Good question. Because look, there are various carriers of a culture, right?
Hmm.
One is stories, the other is cuisine,
Hmm.
the other is language. There are various carriers of a culture. And what is, there are UN reports on this on languages. There are many languages that are literally dying, right?
Hmm.
Um, so it is a risk for many smaller cultures. It may not be a risk for India, to be honest.
Hmm.
We have, there are more people in India than all of North America, all of Europe, all of Middle East combined. There are more languages than all these regions combined. There are
Right.
more cuisines than all these regions combined. We are more a continent, right? Country.
Right.
So I don't think it's a risk for India. But is it a risk for many smaller cultures around the world, this age of globalization? Yes, sadly, yes. And many smaller cultures will not survive because the people who follow those cultures, they themselves will get attracted to another culture, either the Western culture or maybe Indian culture. The more popular and uh, perhaps a wrong term to use, but powerful cultures. Right? India
Right.
is an ancient and in a way a powerful culture because 1.39 billion people already follow it, right?
Right.
And we have a massive Indian diaspora across the world. It's a valid point. It is a risk for smaller cultures, not so much for India.
Uh-huh. There are various questions coming in. I don't know how much time we have, guys. There is one question that I can ask from my heart from something you just said. Do you think that this with so many countries now looking, there has been a reverse effect of globalization too. There has been a certain amount of looking inwards by every culture. Uh, do you think that is healthy overall? Do you think that is something that will find its mean again? Is it an ebb and flow? What is your take on that?
No, good question. I think this has to be answered from a perspective, from a historian's and an
Yeah,
economist's perspective. Many of us believe that this is the only era of globalization ever. Actually, it's an ebb and flow. There have been eras of globalization, then an era of deglobalization. It's happened again and
right,
again. So for example, 2000 years ago, the center of the world was the Indian Ocean trade route, right? Because the Indian Ocean is the only ocean where the winds change direction every year,
mm,
unlike every other, which is ideal for sail ships, right? For
mm,
ships,
yes, yeah,
and you can make an annual round trip. And that led to its own era of globalization, which is where Indian culture also spread so
exactly,
much, right? And then there was an era of deglobalization once again. I think 6th, 7th century when, because
mm,
of the Justinian plague, Eastern
mm,
Roman Empire, Persia, got hit. That's when the Arabs emerged and conquered some of it. So there was an era of deglobalization. Then there was an era of globalization, a fresh era once again, right? There's more
mm,
on the eastern side. Then it declined again. The Mongol era is seen very negatively. The Mongols and the Turks were the
right,
military superpowers. Turks were the
mm,
ones who came to India.
right,
Mongols were the ones who conquered much of China, and much of the ancient world. And then the Mongols themselves are destroyed by the Turks. Both very, very brutal. Both the
mm,
Mongols and the Turks. Turks were probably more brutal. But the Mongols inaugurated an era of globalization as well for a century, right?
right,
So that wasn't sea driven, that was land driven, right?
mm,
And then again, there was an era of deglobalization. Then again, an era of globalization rose again driven by economics, by the Europeans,
mm,
right? And then it declined again when many of the colonies became free, and then it rose again. So this is like an ebb and flow. What happens is, uh, if there are enough people who have benefited from globalization, it gathers momentum as it did over the last few decades. Now
right,
there are enough people who feel they have suffered from globalization. Like you'll find
right,
Indians are very comfortable with globalization because we benefited in the last 30
right,
years. In the
right,
West, globalization has become unpopular. Why? Because the Western middle classes have suffered, to be
right,
honest. The Western elites and countries like India, China have benefited dramatically. Western elites
right.
made tons of money over the last few decades. Western middle classes have been hollowed out. So it's understandable for them to turn against globalization. Is this an era when globalization declines? Perhaps. Let's see. But it's not like the end of history. This goes up and down, there ebbs and flows. It's a part of
I
life.
think, sir, as a closing statement, I think we are completely run out of time. Something that I kind of is an epiphany for me, that storytelling itself is so much of ebb and flow. There is so much of cyclicalness to it. There is so much of evolution within the evolution itself, where the discovery is actually a rediscovery,
Mm.
which is fascinating to understand. Thank you so much for your time,
Yes.
sir. This has been so fabulous. Shivani, over to you.
Absolute, absolute
Thank you.
pleasure chatting with you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Anand.
sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Tripathi and Mr. Tiwari, for such an interesting discussion. Thank you to all our delegates as well for being a wonderful audience. Thank you.